The goal is always to find who are the entrepreneurial talents who are interested to join an early stage company. I realized this was like the biggest puzzle that we're looking to solve. So I asked my fellow entrepreneurs, like, is it safe to start a company? Because what if everything goes wrong? In the startup, it's all one big flow of people trying to build something. Understanding the vulnerability of a leadership role opens up to connect with others.
Welcome back to the Startup Passport by Econsulate. Today we are joined by Raman Ramalingam. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You are the founder of talentX. You're working with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of startups. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Yes. So I come from the Swedish startup scene. And I think for the last 11, 12 years, I have been working with, you could say, recruitment for startups. But the interesting thing is, the goal is always to find who are the entrepreneurial talents who are interested to join an early stage company, not for salary, but for stock options or equity, and build a company together. So, where do these entrepreneurial people exist? How do you find them? How do you talk to them? That's what I specialize in, and it's a fun job.
And what's your background in this? How did you get into the position that you're in right now?
So, interestingly, I don't have any background in HR or recruitment or anything like that. I moved to Sweden to do my master's in software engineering, and following that, I tried my hand in research for a couple of years, and then after that, I kind of gave up completely on academia and ended up being a stand-up comedian in the clubs in Stockholm for a while.
Really?
And in Stockholm, the startup scene is almost like you can't miss it because there's so many companies coming up because Sweden had an amazing years with starting with Skype with one of the co-founders came from Sweden, and then we had Spotify, we had King, the Candy Crush, we had Klarna. So there was a big wave of startup building in. So then I got into the startup scene because I was just curious about all the new companies being built. And then I realized this was like the biggest puzzle that we're looking to solve, which is how do you find other entrepreneurial talents in different skill areas when you're building a company who doesn't come for the highest salary, but someone who comes here for building something together. And then I started specializing in that. So I started my career there in an ecosystem called Sting. So Sting is Stockholm Innovation and Growth. That's the full form. The short form is Sting. And they are the largest startup ecosystem in the Nordics, I think with around 400 to 500 startups that they have invested and scaled just in Stockholm. And so I became their head of talent and thereby entering into this world of startup talent.
And how did your journey look like becoming, the head of that? Because you have then, before that, you had never had your own company before, right?
No. So this was my employment where I started. So I was first an employee for Sting. And then after that, I was an employee for another ecosystem called Norsken. And then shortly after, I started my own company. But interestingly, starting my own company, in the very beginning, I was super afraid because I had no idea about starting companies, even though I was always surrounded by entrepreneurs. I've never personally had that experience. So in the beginning, I was even worried a bit. So I asked my fellow entrepreneurs, like, is it safe to start a company? Because what if everything goes wrong? And then actually they gave a completely different perspective. They said starting the company is the safest way possible because you're not depending on other people's brain or other people's structure or other people's finances. So you're not in the passenger seat anymore. You are in the driver's seat. And as long as you're happy wherever you're going with the company, you feel safe and happy and purposeful. So it somehow changed that maybe starting a company is the safe way. Because then I know where I'm going, or I'll figure out where I'm going than sitting in another person's chair or car.
And I think that makes sense, especially in the long run, but it also makes sense, especially when you're successful with the company. But then a lot of startups fail, and especially at the start, it's long hours, it's hard work, it's low or no salary. How were those considerations for you when starting off? Of course, you already mentioned that you had some concerns, but then, maybe that shifted a little bit. But I'm sure those concerns didn't quite go away, especially at the start.
Interestingly, this is the most amazing realization that I had, which is if you're joining a large corporate, let's say like Ericsson, which is very big in Sweden, or any big corporate, that kind of shuts you in actually, because you lose the touch to the external world. You're kind of in an echo chamber, or a safe chamber within that company's environment. So you only meet people who are also part of that company. You only meet other people who are part of that ecosystem. But when you're running a company, one interesting thing is, so individually, sure, your company has a very high chance of failing, but you're somehow connected so close to the market. Every day you're interacting with customers and you get to know them. Every day you're interacting with other startups that are raising investments. Every day you're talking with VCs. So somehow this ecosystem, there is so much happening that you would easily find yourself moving across startups with ease than moving across corporates, which is not that easy. So here there is a flow that's happening. Sure, one entity can fail, but the whole ecosystem kind of keeps carrying the talents across. Yeah.
And now, having worked with so many different entrepreneurs, having talked to so many different entrepreneurs, what's your secret to, well, identifying those entrepreneurs that you talked about at the start? Those entrepreneurs that are in it for, well, the passion, the drive, that have the idea. So everything that you are looking for in a nutshell.
I mean, the traits that always stand out are grit, of course, perseverance, to not give up. That's one part. But the second part that is more interesting is a sense of urgency. If you talk to any kind of sustainability companies, they would say that no, this year everything has to change and we have to disrupt the market this year. So everybody feels like everything should happen immediately and should happen this year. And that sense of urgency allows people to take bold actions, collaborate with people that they would normally not collaborate in a safe zone. So it kind of makes them push the boundaries. So if someone has a very high perseverance and grit, and then they have the sense of urgency to build something today, then you're on to something really big, because then you're talking with a builder who wants to build something today, and then they are in a different kind of mindset altogether, which is what I would say even in my company, since I work with startups in talent and recruitment, let's say as one key area. Normally, if you talk to a traditional recruitment company, they would ask you can ask them, are you a tech recruiter or are you a commercial recruiter? What roles do you focus on? Are you more focused on Sweden or Nordics? Which geography do you focus on? But you can never ask me a question like that. And the reason for that is the startup ecosystem is so connected that yesterday I would work with a startup in Poznan in Poland. The next day I would work with a startup in Wageningen in Netherlands. The other day I would work with a startup in Rwanda, in Kenya. So I would work with startups globally, and the industries that I work with would vary from defense, that suddenly one day I would work within the defense sector. Next day with an industrial water treatment company that is trying to recreate something. Next day it will be like a plastic additive manufacturing company. So the kind of companies also are quite diverse and the markets are diverse, which logically doesn't make sense from a traditional perspective. But in the startup, it's all one big flow of people trying to build something. And there's so much commonality across the world. When you meet another founder, you will understand he or him, she or her. But if with corporates or industries, it's difficult to make that connection globally.
And you talked about urgency before, and that's something you're looking for. Where's the line between someone having, well, a very good sense for urgency, feeling the need to do something now, and let's just call it being naive in a sense that things are going to work out right now, still having that sense of optimism, but where does that realism come in? That entrepreneurs still need to see, well, the downsides or the challenges ahead, so that not everything can be based on that belief that it is going to work out.
I mean, interestingly, when it comes to naivete, I would say actually the sense of urgency is non-negotiable, because even if someone is naive and optimistic, they should be able to quickly fail, quickly pivot, quickly change, quickly kind of adapt into another successful company. Like we all know the stories of how YouTube started as a dating app, or how Slack started as a gaming company. So we know all of these stories of how companies started and then how they pivoted into something else that became a global success. And that kind of optimism, naivete, is totally fine as long as they're open to fail. The biggest problem with naivete for me is that people try to protect ideas. Whenever we meet an entrepreneur and then we ask, what are you working with? And then the founder says, I can't reveal you my idea because it's so precious. That's naivete personified, which is, it's not about the idea at all. It's about who can execute it, how you can adapt it, change it. So it's somebody so protective of the idea and they are worried about failing. That's a bad optimism. That's not going to lead to anything good. But as long as they're willing to try it, experiment it, sure, they could be all optimistic as they want, as long as they're ready to put it on the road and test it on the market.
And after having talked to so many entrepreneurs, now being an entrepreneur yourself, another entrepreneur that I previously talked to also said, well, it can also sometimes feel quite isolating or lonely, especially if you're not already surrounded by other entrepreneurs. So you enter kind of like a lonely chapter where you cannot surround yourself with other entrepreneurs because you're not at that stage yet. Maybe you're just starting off. Do you have a piece of advice that you learned from talking to so many people on still keeping going even when maybe your environment doesn't quite understand what you're doing or why you're doing it, because again, maybe you're not surrounded by other entrepreneurs?
I mean, a CEO journey is incredibly lonely, especially in early startup phases. One of the loneliest role you could have is like a CEO of a company in a startup or scale up, because you're kind of responsible for everything, but then you cannot complain to anybody, and you have to take it and move forward. So it is quite hard. In fact, I spoke with a person who's been a serial founder and serial CEO who's now 65 years old. And then he said every time he was a CEO in the last 15, 20 years, the only way for him to exit had been getting fired, where a new CEO replaces. And then he said it in a very laughing way, which is, if you're a CEO, that's natural that you expect to get fired if something doesn't work out, because you're always making bold decisions, trying things out. And if you fail, if anybody fails, you take the responsibility and the board says, no, you're not a fit anymore. So it's understanding that the game is such that it's lonely, and game is such where you could be fired from your own company with the board or investors, or depending on the decisions you make. That actually adds to the connecting aspect, which is, as long as you understand the reality, you kind of connect with other CEOs, other team members, and it actually opens up that understanding, that vulnerability of being a CEO, because a CEO is super vulnerable position, even though it sounds badass on paper. So understanding the vulnerability of a leadership role opens up to connect with others, I would say.
Thank you very much for sharing all of that, for sharing a little bit of your own journey as well.
Thank you.
Good luck with everything that's still coming up with talentX. Definitely some exciting projects ahead. And thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.